This is a Film Stories original podcast.
Mother's Day is almost here, and you can get her the most beautiful time-tested gift around. A watch she can wear every day from Movement. Whether your mom is into classic dress watches, rare and refined ceramics, or tried-and-true bestsellers, Movement has something she'll love. And right now, everything at Movement is up to 50% off site-wide during their Mother's Day sale. A watch is a gift that celebrates all the time you spent with Mom. And a Movement watch is even more than that. Movement uses industry-leading materials for their fresh, modern watch designs, from technically complex ceramics to vintage-inspired style. All for an incredible value your wrist and wallet will both love. And with one-size-fits-all convenience and fast free shipping and returns, it's a stress-free shopping experience. Save big on the best Mother's Day gift ever with Movement. Get up to 50% off site-wide during their Mother's Day sale at mvmt.com. Again, that's up to 50% off at mvmt.com.
We made this.
Hi, my name's Chris Owens. I played Jeffrey Spender on The X-Files, and I'm happy to be talking on the X-Cast.
Welcome back, everybody, to the X-Cast. As ever, the truth is in here. I'm your host today, Carl Sweeney, and thank you very much for joining me for our discussion of the first episode of Season 6 of the X-Files and the X-Cast, The Beginning. And I'm delighted to be joined on this episode by my fellow showrunners, Sarah, Blair, and Kurt North. Hi, guys.
Hello, hello.
Hello, how are you doing, mate?
Yes, I'm doing very good. It's an exciting new chapter for the podcast, for the show. What I will say first of all is we normally have Darren Mooney with us on the season premieres. He will be back with us later in the season, but we thought, didn't we, that, first episode of season 6, first episode, just a new chapter. I thought it'd be good. We thought it'd be good, wouldn't it, for us three to do this first episode. So nice to have you both here.
Yeah, it's nice to be here. Ironically, when I was coming on the call before, I noticed Darren Mooney's actually active on Skype.
I bet he's doing another podcast.
It's probably doing something. It's nice to have the change in show running. Obviously, with the change in venue with going to LA. And one thing I wanted to mention was that the beginning of the beginning has that beautiful sunshine. We're now in LA, and when you started when you did the podcast for Fight the Future Minute, the first minute you said how it's the hottest day on record. Today, I don't know if it's like for you, Carl, but today seems to look like it's the wettest day on record.
It's absolutely pissing it down. And I looked at the weather forecast earlier and it was just like 80% chance of heavy rain for the entire day. So yeah, there's something grimly ironic about having to watch this sun-dappled episode of the podcast.
Clearly, you guys are not in Arizona.
All right, so our first episode of Showrunners. Should we just say a word or two on that? Like, what are our hopes for the podcast going forward? Sarah, what does this era mean for you?
Well, I hope that we can have a much lighter show, than we have been.
It was always so grim before, wasn't it?
Yeah. This is going to be X-Cast Light. So prepare yourselves for that.
Yeah, well, we'll see about that. What do you think, Kurt?
I'm looking forward to. Talk about X-Cast Light. I think the genesis of having like these three-way conversations obviously comes from you, Sarah, Carl, and Tony. And I'm just happy to be doing some episodes that we're going to do through the season with us three together. I think that's quite a nice little change. Build that up. I know we've had some podcasts that have already been recorded, but what I particularly like the idea of is having a consistency like I've had over on The Time Is Now, of me pretty much doing most of them. It's been nice to have one of us three, there or thereabouts within an episode of each other. So I'm looking forward to having that cohesion.
I just hope that we continue to provide, an interesting, balanced look at the series because, X-Files is a very, I guess, multifaceted series and multifaceted fandom. There's lots of different opinions on every aspect of the show. And I think the Xcast has done a really good job in the past at representing a lot of that, and I'm sure and I hope we will continue to do so. So I'm really looking forward to it. First episode of season 6 then. What about this season in general, before we come on to the beginning specifically? Like, are you guys big fans of season 6?
Yes.
Why?
No, I love season 6. It has, a while back, I did a calculation and I added up out of every season which seasons have the most episodes that I rewatch.
Yeah.
And for me, it's season 6. So as far as rewatchability goes, which is kind of when I say my favorite episodes, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think season 6 is probably the top rewatchability season for me. Yeah. So I'm really looking forward to discussing, some of my favorite episodes. And I don't mind the lighter episodes. I prefer those, actually. So I'm one of the weirdos. But yeah.
No, I think there are a lot of people who feel that way, to be fair. Kurt, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I always think season 6, I don't know why I think this, but it always feels like, in musical terms, just like the change, a different way of looking at the show. It feels like an album in some ways, season 6 to me. It feels more like a piece because of the change in direction and stuff. There's going to be some surprises. There's going to be some shipper surprises from my end, actually, strangely enough, because I actually really adore the Rain King, and there's elements in Triangle I quite like as well. But I like the change in style. I like it's a strong season. I don't think, for me, something like season 3 is my favourite, but season 6, I think Sarah's probably hit it on the head, actually. It's the rewatchability of these episodes are actually quite nice. They're episodes you can put on and enjoy, and not necessarily to pay that much attention to them. But actually, they're just a delight to put on and watch. So yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see the differing opinions on 6, because as a mythology person as well, I mean, you've got 2001 Sun and obviously this one.
Yeah,
I'm not as bothered by this stage of in the season's run about the mythology at this point, because I'm more interested in the change in style and the change in direction because of the new venture and the new LA setting.
Yeah, I like season 6. I like it more than I used to as well. And there's just quite a few episodes here that I love, and I can't wait to either talk about them or hear what other people have to say about them. It might not be me on those episodes, but episodes like Drive, Tivinus, Monday, Milagro, Field Trip, all great stuff. And then I think there's quite a few episodes which they're not necessarily my thing all the time, but they're undoubtedly like fan favourites, and they're really interesting in their own way. Stuff like Triangle, Dreamland, How the Ghost Stole Christmas, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing is, there's not that many episodes in this season which are, really bad, are there? I mean, there's the odd episode like Alpha, which is not that interesting, but they're few and far between, Sarah, aren't they? There's a lot of good stuff here.
Also, I like how, spoiler alert, Mulder and Scully are not on the X-Files, but I'd like to see how they handle that and still make it X-Files-y, because we still get Mulder and Scully, but they're not technically investigating X-Files, which is not the first time this has happened in the series, but, it's definitely fun to have the LA stuff plus the no X-Files stuff plus, all that. And they handled it pretty well, I think. It made for some really fun sort of experimental episodes and just kind of a fresher outside the box take, but it still feels like X-Files.
Well, I think the season 2 stuff, obviously we had Mulder away from Scully, or they were both separated, where at the beginning, in this episode especially, we find, they're still working together, and so it's an interesting dynamic that way. Yeah, the X-Files is finished, but they're still, they're being run by two new agents, and I'm sure I'll talk about that later. But yeah, you've got they're still working together, and obviously it's X-File cases come to them or they seek them out, which is it's an interesting dynamic to take. And I do have some issues with maybe not using the X-Files as much and how they could have done that, but we can get into that in the episode.
Yeah, well, I like the way that in episodes like Drive, I like the way they kind of tool around and they end up finding the case. But I think we can talk about it, how it relates to this episode, I think, too, which is The Beginning, written by Chris Carter, directed by Kim Manners, first broadcast on November the 8th, 1998. Yeah, let's start with some general thoughts then before we delve into some of the specifics. So yeah, general thoughts on the beginning, Sarah, and like a mark out of 10. How high would you go?
Yeah, I don't totally love the mythology, but I'm going to say 7 for this episode, because I think mostly what I like about this is the dynamic about Mulder and Scully, the shipper stuff. So I like their characters. Skinner, obviously. So he gets high marks for me, and I have a lot of thoughts about the Skin Man. So
shocked.
coming out.
I'm shocked.
I know.
Really?
But
hopefully some of them can be broadcast. But we'll see. What about you, Kat? Is this a good episode or not?
I think it's a solid episode. I wouldn't say it's one that instantly comes to mind when I'm thinking about mythology. I think the problems I have with it isn't necessarily about the episode itself. It's about the fact that they don't really come back to it. Especially with what's happened in the film and the beginning, that we don't get any fallout from what happens with the alien changing into what it does. It's kind of like just forgotten, and then you get to 2001 Sun, it goes back to the mythology back in season 5. So it's very much on its own there. It's trying to display stuff for people coming into the show after seeing the film. It's trying to bridge the gap between the end and the film. I think it does a solid job. And as a standalone mythological episode, I think it works quite well. And I would give it 7.5 out of 10. But yeah, I think it does a lot of things, and it's quite effective in some ways. And I'm sure we'll talk about some of the elements as well, which I think should have been picked up as the seasons went on. But yeah, 7.5 out of 10 for me.
See, I've written down 5.5/6 myself. I've always found it quite difficult to get into this one. I feel a bit of a sense of tiredness at certain points in this episode, and I think it's in the way it kind of backtracks from the film a bit, and just the way it gives us some things which by now are very familiar, which we could talk about. But I don't know, I can't, after what they've been through in Fight the Future, there are some things here which, try as I might, and I've tried to get past them, but I can't help but see it as a bit of a disappointment after what we see in the film. So we'll talk about it. I think some of the things they put them through are probably, they think are necessary given the way they want the series to go afterwards. But yeah, I think it's a bit of a compromised episode. I do think there's some solid stuff here too, to be fair. So there are some good things we can talk about. All right, before we talk about them though, what about the IMDb? Because we always look at the IMDb score. I don't know if either of you have looked.
I have not. I resisted the temptation.
Okay, so we can do it. This is one of the good things about having a freeway chat. Is that we can do
just emphasis on chat.
Yes. Is we can do this competitively. So whoever's closest wins the prize. So what do you think this got on IMDb, Sarah? To the nearest decimal place?
8.2.
Okay. And Kurt?
Ooh, because I was going to go lower than that. I'm going to go with 7.8.
Sarah wins because this got 8.4 out of 10.
Wow. Okay.
On IMDb at the time of recording. 2,559 votes. It puts it equal 12th for the season out of 22 episodes. Equal with How to Go Stole Christmas and Biogenesis. But solidly middle of the pack. Is that about right?
Yeah.
I would say it's about right, yeah. I'm not sure how the Source Ghost Christmas should be higher than that, I would have thought, personally. But yeah, I'd definitely go middle of the pack. I think that's probably about right where it needs to be, yeah.
The big surprise for me was Milagro was only on like a 7.9, I think, when I looked, which I thought people loved Milagro. Oh, a lot of people did, so that surprised me. But yeah,
I mean, I did kind of look at when I was recording Dreamland. I looked through most of season 6, and it didn't seem like there were that many that were far below a 7 at all.
Yeah.
It seemed like an overall pretty highly rated season.
Yeah, I thought so too. I think the mythology episodes traditionally are in the earlier years, and they seem to be in this season too. And then there's quite a few fan favourites, so I think you're right. But 8.4 seems high to me for this episode. But let's try and tease that out a bit when we discuss this episode in depth. All right, so this teaser then, we'll talk about. We'll try and go through it, not necessarily in exhaustive detail, but we'll go through it in chronological order. The teaser, we get the sun, I think is the main thing.
Oh, you missed the previously.
Previously on. Yeah, because we get the movie stuff. That was so exciting. It was like, oh, the movie.
And I wonder if that sets them up for a bit of a fail here, because we see the big spaceship, and then this has to be a bit more kind of, closed in by comparison, doesn't it? Because of the budget and so on. But yeah, that's a good point, Kurt. Yeah, well made.
I thought it was interesting. I think it's purely designed, obviously, for people who might not have once seen the film, because I'm not quite sure what the gap was between. What was the gap between Fight the Future being released and the series coming out?
Do we know? It came out here in June.
This is November that the beginning is broadcast.
Okay,
and obviously a summer film,
so it could have been coming out on DVD, because it wasn't like nowadays. Nowadays they're generally released within 12 weeks, but it would have been 6 months to a year really before films would have come out. So the fact that they've put that in, and the very fact that they have to bridge the gap between Diana Fowley, Spender, and then the film is interesting in itself, and obviously the way they line that up is interesting. And then obviously the coming. I know we'll talk about the Sun and the I think in a second, and the panel, and the panel's obviously joining in. So yeah, I think it needed to do that, because it obviously was the big blockbuster event that they wanted it to be. But also I think for newcomers, I think they needed to know that, and potentially people who don't go to the movies.
And it all starts with that previously, you're right. And of course, the Sun is nice as a kind of a nod to the fact that now they're filming in LA, they have to do a different kind of thing. So this whole thing's about this guy, Sandy, who we see in the van with his colleagues, shivering, breathing heavily, gets home, whacks the heating up, basically gives birth to an alien.
Okay,
well, we kind of blew through that. Yeah. No, the guy, his coworker reminds me of Rob Schneider from SNL. Because he's got a nickname for everybody, He's like...
Dipwad.
Yeah, Dipwad, but, and he's like... Rob Schneider's like, the Sandman, Sandy McSanderson, That's what that guy reminds me of.
I know people can't see what I just did on screen there, but there's also the off-camera giving the finger as well.
Yeah.
Which, I know that there's obviously the bad blood and stuff like that. I've tried to use shh and stuff, but there's that, the Dickwad stuff. And the person who was actually giving birth to the aliens, the casting director as well.
Oh, really?
Rick Millican. Yeah.
He always reminds me of just that low shot. It always, every single time, reminds me of the bounty hunter. He just that's the only shot that reminds me of that, but he looks like the bounty hunter in that one shot.
One thing I forgot to mention is that the van they're in has the Roush Technologies logo, and we've heard about them before in the Redux episodes, haven't we? Roush with Blevins and all that. So that's kind of interesting. Do you think the acting, though, because the Dipwad guy is an interesting one, and Chris Knowles talks about this in one of the comments, and I was thinking similar, because obviously now they're in LA, they're drawing from a different pool of actors, and what Chris goes on to say in his comment, which I'll read at the end, is... There are a few of them here who are maybe not as good as the people they used to get in Vancouver, starting with that guy from the teaser. So do you feel any of that? Do you feel any difference at all?
I do. It's definitely more Hollywood-esque and such. I mean, it doesn't feel as grounded. And it's almost, even to the point where whether or not it's because of the area that they're basing it in, and they're trying to have that frivolity and joyous kind of colleagues working together thing, where we're so used to having, in the rainy atmosphere and whatever, and the actors around having that pool of actors who are, theatre thespians or whatever. It did feel that there was more of a jovial atmosphere, and I don't like the way they were using the word dickwad and stuff. It just didn't feel quite right for me.
I mean, I like this teaser. I quite like the suburbs. I quite like the eerie Mark Snow music we get at one point. I read somewhere they were going for kind of an Edward Scissorhands vibe with this location. I can see a bit of that. So it gets us off and running. And then we see Mulder restoring the X-Files, which, of course, had been destroyed in the fire in the end of season 5 in the end.
Poor Mulder. He's trying so hard.
I quite like this. I don't know about you, Sarah, and I suppose it has a new resonance now, because the book we've just had, the Paul Terry book, makes a lot of play off the fact that these files have been restored and all that. But it's nice to see him kind of plugging away at it, I think.
He's trying so hard. Bless his little heart.
It's going to take him years, isn't it?
Oh.
So he's got some kind of moisture restoration process. I don't even know how you do that. And then we see the hearing, and I don't know, because obviously what part of this is a way to recap the story of the film for the audience who may not have seen it, or who may have seen it a few months ago and may not remember, and they need to be quickly brought up to speed. But I don't know, is it quite a crude way to do that? I kind of miss Blythe Danner as well. I think it would have been nice if you'd have been able to have her as a bit of continuity, but I guess that just wasn't possible. But what do you reckon about this hearing?
I like Wendy Malick. I think she's a good replacement. Yeah. I mean, if you're going to have to replace her, I think she's great at it. She's in one of my favorite movies, American President.
Is that the Michael Douglas thing?
Yeah.
I
love this scene. One of my favorite lines from this scene where the guy is like, so it's like that movie Men in Black, and Mulder's like, I didn't see it. And he's like, it's a damn good movie. That makes me laugh every time.
You see, I don't like that. I don't like that bit. It just felt a bit forced for me. I know we had the ID4 poster in the film, and the Men in Black thing was just a bit too much on the nose for me. For me, though, I'm in two minds. I know what you're saying, Carl, with the fact that, is it a bit too on the nose with what we've had in Fight the Future? But I think one of my favourite moments of this episode is the absence of Skinner at the end of when we come back to this. So I think you've got to have this to be able to have that hit a bit more home, because the fact that Skinner's now no longer there, especially when we're talking about the restoration and the conversation of unanimous against and stuff, and the things with Spender that come up later on, it needs to have that.
I just don't understand though why Mulder and Scully. My main problem with this scene is, why don't they get their ducks in a row before the hearing?
Yes, I totally agree with that.
They would just need to sit down. What are we going to say? And I just don't buy that you would get to the hearing. And because Scully says something like, I was hoping it wouldn't come up. And it's like, come on, Scully. This was always going to be discussed.
This whole episode seems like they're highly lacking in communication. Like, throughout the whole thing, it's like, that's pretty much kind of the theme of my notes, is like, why aren't they communicating better? And you would think after 6 years they would be able to, at least talk about this stuff. It's not like in the movie when Scully was running around trying to gather evidence and she just barely gets there and she doesn't even have time to change her clothes. She just, gets in from Texas. It's not like that. Like, she knew she was coming into this meeting, and Mulder knew she was going to be there. Like you said, I don't know why you didn't just talk about this. Why didn't they strategize?
Well, it's quite hard to take given the narrative of the film for me, because the film was all about the fact they were separated, but they ended up united. They had a common purpose. So I find this as a bit of a reset, a bit hard to take. It feels a bit too calculated for me. Yeah. I imagine what Carter was thinking, and I might be wrong, but he's probably thinking the series needs this kind of dynamic still to work. And that might be true, but it means that this episode is a bit hamstrung as a result. What do you reckon, Kurt?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think that some of the conversations that they have throughout this episode is trying to reset. And I don't necessarily think that you needed to do that. And this is one of my big things of saying moving the season forward. And, I've kept my mouth shut on Diana Fowley, to be absolutely honest with you, and what I feel about it, because I think my actual thoughts on Diana Fowley is probably different to what a lot of people think. Is that you've got a perfect example within the beginning that you've got a new beginning, like they're basically saying that you could have, like, that OPR scene could be the fact that you've got the science behind it. However you write it, you need to write it differently, but you've got the fact that they're doing all this work behind the scenes, and the fact that we all could be human, and the DNA comes up as junk DNA and whatever, but the very fact that they're not on the X-Files, does that warrant it? Could they have been more cohesive about going to these meetings and them just not accepting it because there's no percentage of proof, and you're not proving that, and then having the Diana Fowley and Spender dynamic with the Kirsch dynamic as well, because Kirsch obviously only just appears in this one episode at the very end. Yeah. That you've got the hard hitting boss, and you've got the potential of using Fowley as your your Skinner type character with not knowing which side she's on, and then you've got your Spender who's totally against it and doesn't believe anything. But you still could have the arguments within Scully and Mulder to have that. You've just got different areas you can bounce off, and I don't think they use it. I think they go back to being into a bubble, and I think the way they should have done it, should have expanded it, similar to what you do in season 7 with with Krycek and Marita, where they could have gone down a different route with that as well. I think and that probably is a test to the franchise element of the X-Files, that you could this is where the brand should have expanded out, and you would have maybe have had less resistance with, say, like an Albuquerque, like we've been talking about. But what it does is it retreats back into its tropes of believer skeptic, and Scully's gone too far at this point, as you say. I think it's a bit. It doesn't really quite track the fact that Scully's gone back to this thing of I need to believe the science, and the way they put the science in there for Gibson Praise and her testing and stuff like that. I know it leads to biogenesis, but there is an element of no, I'm not sure. I think they've backtracked too far.
Did you find this element hard to swallow as well, Sarah? Because
Yeah.
You were saying earlier that you liked the Mulder-Scully communication, though, but so what do you think?
No, I felt like they definitely could have talked a little bit better and with each other a little more, but this, like, the scene here is, like, Wendy Malick just keeps saying, like, spacelings, and it's so degrading. You just see Scully and Skinner both just, like, cringing inside, and they're just like, oh my god, like, this is a shit show. Like, this is all so bad. But then, like, Mulder and Mulder is so mad, and I don't totally understand. Like, I was trying to work through this when I was watching the second time. Like, why is Scully doubling down on the science? Because I can understand Mulder's frustration. He just went through the Antarctic tundra of, like, whatever, like, rescued Scully from a fucking alien spaceship, And he's like, I just went to the ends of the earth for you, Scully, and, like, why can't you just believe? And it's very frustrating, and I get it, because, like, she's doubling down really hard on the science. But then I thought about it, and I was like, okay, why is she really doing this? And it kind of makes me wonder if maybe she's just scared, and, like, she can't, like, the science is her way of processing everything. She's got to make sense of it somehow, and that's just how she's working through it, because, I mean, it was a lot for her, too. Even though, like, she was the one who had the virus inside her body and was affected by it, and she's trying to, like, figure things out in her own way, which I think is also fair. But at the same time, it is very frustrating.
Yeah, well, she says in a later scene, doesn't she, like, if I change now, it wouldn't be right or honest. Mm-hmm. And it's like, okay, yes, but it all still seems a bit contrived and convoluted.
We can talk. I definitely want to talk about that when we get to it, because
if they put more emphasis on the fact that something happened to me, I want to find out what that was. You can make more sense of it, but it just seems to be that, oh well, Mulder's going, I saved you from a goddamn ship, Scully, and Scully's going, I don't not believe you, but the science isn't saying. It's like, just say something happened to me. I'm not happy. I've been injected. I need to find out what this is. I don't believe what you're saying. I need that evidence. Where's the evidence? Come and get the evidence. And I don't think it feels more like, oh well, I'm just going to look for some science in a lab, and it just doesn't seem to work.
Right.
Well, she says, I mean, we had the debate on Fight the Future Minute about what did she see in the Arctic and or in the Antarctic, and she says at this point, what I saw was very little. So just thought it was interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move it on a bit. So the syndicate pop up again. I don't know about you guys. This is the kind of thing I was thinking about when I'm talking about a sense of tiredness, because I used to lap this stuff up when the syndicate would pop up. But at this point in the series, it just feels a bit rote. Now, the thing is, they don't actually have that long left, the syndicate. Yeah. But I don't know if you know what that kind of feeling I'm describing.
Yes, well, I mean, I noted that, we don't have the well-manicured man anymore to say, my God! You know how, like, every single time he's in a scene, my God! So then I
said it enough on Fight the Future Minute, so I'm going to leave it.
Yeah. So then we've got one of the elders being like, God almighty. It's like, it's just the same lines over and over. So yes, I understand what you mean.
Oh, I'm glad it's not just me then.
Yeah, no, I felt the same way. And then, we've got, as if we didn't know that the cigarette smoking man was evil enough. He's like evil and a complete and utter racist, just to make that clear. He's just like, we're gonna say it was the red man who did it, and they'll believe it. It's like, oh my God, really, dude?
Yeah, it becomes too explicit. I think this is the trick I was going to say about the syndicate. And don't get me wrong, I can imagine this getting tired as well. But the one, we didn't have well-manicured man's funeral. Why not? We should need to see that. But that's just me being facetious. But the fact that they've just found this new fact of biology, and I am paraphrasing struggled here, that it's like all of a sudden the Rausch, now whether or not you decide whether the virus that they've got was in the tanker trucks that they've used and moved around, and the fact that Rausch have been testing on it and someone's injecting themselves by accident, whatever, that it's just accepted. It's not like there's no fallout from the film about this new fact or this new information. It's more like, oh, they were infected, let's sort it out, let's deal with it. And I think it needed more of a syndicate like exposure point of view or something where, you know, they could have taken that in a direction as well, which I don't feel they did. They just kind of like, oh yeah, that's fine. And then, you know, when we get to Two Fathers, One Son, it goes, well, you know, the alien turns into a little grey alien after it's birthed, and we're back to where we were. And I just don't buy that. I think it needed to have some fallout from the film with this new fact, and it doesn't do that.
I think as well that this episode seems to have the potential to be quite an interesting, like, monster on the loose kind of story, doesn't it? Like the alien has gestated, has ripped out this guy's torso or whatever, and then it's out in the suburbs. That seemed to me like could be really interesting, but we kind of miss a few steps, don't we? Because it gets straight to the nuclear power plant, and I think maybe because there's so much going on here, because there's stuff we have to catch up people from the film, because we've got the syndicate, because Spender and Foley are around. And so is Skinner, Sarah, because we get that nice scene with Mulder and Skinner.
Yeah.
He's trying to play the game, isn't he? Like, he can't vote against the group. He's more useful to them, you know, inside the tent, I guess is what he's saying. But he's trying to help them. He's trying to give them the file and all that. So, yeah, what did you make of your main man? Yeah.
Oh, well. So, okay. So he says, like, to Mulder... he tells Mulder, when will you accept that no amount of pressure or reasoning will bring to heel a conspiracy whose members walk these halls with impunity? I mean, we've already had cigarette smoking man just walk around the FBI already, talking to Spender and hanging out with no impunity, whatever. So he's right. But also, you realize, you know, because he's already talked about this to Mulder. Mulder knows, like, things happened to Skinner in Vietnam like 30 years before this. So here we've got Skinner who has been dealing with this stuff for 30 years, like pretty much as long as Mulder's been alive, basically. And then Mulder's like coming in here and just like blowing everything all to hell, basically. I can understand his frustration, but also, and like he's trying to tell Mulder, like, you've got to play the game. You've got to play the long game, because that's what he's been doing for so long, you know, and he knows these people. He knows how they work. He's had experience with this. And Mulder just gets mad, and he's such a man baby, and it makes me nuts. Like, trust Skinner, please. And it drives me crazy, because it's like, I know I say this every single time Skinner comes up, but it's like, just trust Skinner, because he knows what he's doing. He's been here. He's got the experience. And it also kind of made me wonder, like, am I correct in thinking is Skinner still in charge of the X-Files? Even though he's been, like, you know, he gets in trouble later, but is he technically going to be in charge of Spender and Foley?
At this moment in time, it looks like that, yeah.
Yeah, because I feel like Skinner and Foley might have made a pretty good team, because they both get it. They both kind of understand what they're trying to do here, and, like, they both want the same things. And it's like, maybe, I don't know.
Or do they? Because, Foley, okay.
We don't know who Foley's working for, but just going down that train of thought where if she is...
Yeah, what she says
she is. What she tells Mom, which we don't know. We definitely can't trust Foley. Sorry, Kurt, but...
Well, this is the thing, because obviously Mulder gets the file from the office, and that's where he discovers that Spender and Foley are assigned to the X-Files. And we need to stop and address this, Kurt, because... and we'll have to cue in like the slow jazz music here. But I think online, I've seen you vigorously defending Diana Fowley's corner, and she's not the most popular character the X-Files has ever seen.
Yeah.
What is it you like about her? Because, like, what is there to like, honestly?
Well, this is the thing. It's I've kept my cards close to my chest because I want to discuss it. It's not necessarily what I like about her. It's what I like about bringing her in as a character to the show. Mm-hmm. And I think they had major missteps. Don't get me wrong. Why on earth they put that her taking the top off in Biogenesis or whatever it is, I will never know. It just doesn't make any sense. But,
I think I can imagine why.
Yeah,
but, cool.
but I'm sure you'll get to that when we talk about that. But the very dynamic of the show needed to be shaken up, and I think that bringing back Deana works for me because you've got the inevitable tension between the three of them. And I'm not a massive soap opera type person, but from a show development situation Deana Foley even says it here where she went, I think I know who she's working for. And I think the long game is that she does have affections for Mulder. She does still love him. And the only way that she can help in that way is that when she did go to Berlin, that she was trying to do what's best. Now she made some very, very wrong choices. But in the long game, she wanted to help him. She wanted to do... Her idea was within the work for the X-Files, and she wanted that truth and that element to come out. And I have issues with what happened in the end of the way Scully reacts to her. I have issues. I think that the way that Mulder acts, as stupid as he is true to life. I think it's you can be blindsided by people. The fact that that he's really struggling in the end. The fact that he's kind of caught between two worlds. He didn't want this part of his history to come back, really, because obviously there's been hurt there. And I think it's just a really deep way of actually talking about, the fact that, they all have a past, they all have to deal with things. And I think that Deana Foley, as an idea, as a concept, is a good way of actually developing that story. And I do totally agree that there was problems down the line, the way she's written. She's not written very well at all from one episode to another. I think this one particularly is probably one of the better episodes that she's written for because of the way that she does come to Mulder later on and she does speak to him and they do have a good conversation in the car. And, you've got those elements outside the nuclear power plant where she's trying to intimate the fact that she's looking out for them. And then you've got obviously towards the end where she's having to play that duality. And that's what I'm saying with the Skinner thing. If you're going to take Skinner out of the equation, you need something like that. And that's one of the main reasons why I actually think she's a really good character for that reason. But yeah, so that's part of my defence, and I'm sure I'll get into it as the season goes on.
And here was me thinking it was just because you liked Mimi Rogers.
Well, no, but strangely enough, though, I do think that I think the idea for casting Mimi Rogers in the role, I think it's the right choice to cast someone like that. Whether or not Mimi Rogers was quite right, because she does come across as, and I don't know if it's the way she's been asked to play it, but she doesn't come across that well. She's not going to be like a Tricia Helfer from Battlestar Galactica. You're not going to cast someone like that in that role. You need someone almost, even like sort of Whitney in I Want to Believe, someone like that, someone who's more grounded or down to earth. You need a character like that. And I can see why they went with Mimi, because you don't want, a buxom blonde or whatever, something that will turn Mulder's head. You want something that's more intellectually aspiring or, more thought-provoking that way, rather than actually having it as just, it's old Chickadee, old Phoebe Green kind of thing. So it needs to be someone that's got more gravitas to them and more intelligence, and I think that's why they went with Mimi.
What's your view on the foul one, Sarah?
I actually I very much agree with Kurt. And it bothers me, I think, the most that she's kind of dropped in the middle of this. When Mulder originally tells Scully, I found the X-Files and this, and this, he doesn't bring up, I found the X-Files with somebody. Obviously he's not going to talk about that then. But, so we get her at the end, and it's this big bombshell, we discovered the X-Files together. But then we have the film in which she is not in at all and not mentioned at all. And that's he was going to go and see her when he was drunk. That's right. That's just another story.
Yeah,
he was going to go and see her. But yeah, no, and I think that's part of the detriment of having the film. And there was no way around it, It had to be done that way because they had to get it all finished and ready for release ahead of time. But, you didn't get to include Deana in that. And then she comes back for the beginning. And so it's like she drops in and out. And it's very confusing. And like Kurt said, I feel like there's a lot more there. And I think it would have been really great if she could have been fleshed out better as an actual character. But one thing that especially bothers me is that we don't get her why. We never get, like, when Mulder talks about her discovering the X-Files, we get Mulder's why. Like, he found the X-Files and he's in it and he knows because of Samantha. But, like, why is she into all this? What is her why? Like, Skinner, he had his experiences in Vietnam that made him a believer, and we never get the reasons from Deana about it's just like, we studied this, and it's like, okay, but like that's an unusual thing to study. That's an unusual thing to be interested in. Like, why are you interested in this stuff? Where's your motivation for, getting into this and becoming interested in the X-Files and the paranormal?
Yeah, and that's probably an argument which I would say as well, when it goes back to the whole thing of Syndicate and stuff, that there's not enough of sprinkled. I mean, you're talking 5 or 6 episodes over a space of 18 months of the show.
Yeah,
and
true.
it doesn't really kind of involve her enough to actually, because this again, and it goes back to the fact that the first part of the season, the show's called The X-Files. I know we're here for Mulder and Scully and their adventures, but we never really get an indication over the first 6 to 8 episodes what they're doing. And it feels like, it doesn't feel like there's a connection with that. It's almost like, I'm not saying you would like 3 episodes of Foley and Spender and 3 episodes of Mulder and Scully, because that wouldn't work, but there just doesn't seem to be that element at all within the first part of the season. I think it suffers that way.
I've always wondered that, like, what it would be like to see maybe just one episode where we follow them on a case, and maybe Mulder and Scully are shadowing them and have to rescue them or something, to give us a bit more of a sense of what they're doing down there,
I did think it was very interesting that both of the times that Mulder and Scully are quote, quote, replaced on the X-Files, we've got Foley, who is technically the believer, and then Spender is very much a skeptic.
Mm-hmm.
And
really?
then, and then later on when we get Doggett and Reyes is the believer and Doggett's the more the skeptic. And I wonder, like, I love that from the very beginning, the roles were Scully skeptic, Mulder believer. And it's interesting that they've switched it back, these two, like, when they're trying to do that. You know what I'm saying? And it kind of made me wonder, like, how would the X-Files have been different if Scully was Mulder and Mulder was Scully? You know what I mean? Like, they had swapped the gender roles, I guess, and made Scully the believer character and Mulder the skeptic.
I think it would have been a bit more of a conventional series, because I think that was always part of the argument.
Yeah.
And I think Chris Carter's talked about this, that it was quite a neat inversion. So I'm kind of glad we got it as it is,
Definitely.
I think on Foley, I agree with Kurt that conceptually, I think she's an interesting character. I don't think she appears enough. I don't think that enough is done with her to make the concept really work.
Yeah.
And I think it's not even just the way she's written, it's sometimes the way the other characters are written to accommodate her. And I take your point that it's entirely believable that, a woman can turn up from your past or whatever, and you're not thinking straight, and maybe Mulder acts a bit differently because of that. But even so, I don't always buy it. And I think how drastically he changes towards Scully sometimes when Diana's around seems a bit much to me. But do we think they were married? Because obviously in season 5, we see the flashback episodes where Mulder's wearing the ring. Then there's this, she turns up at the end of the season. She's this figure from his past. Do we think they were married for a short time, or how do we read that?
No.
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 Do you remember the episodes? Because in Travelers, Mulder has the ring, and I think, is it also in Unusual Suspects?
I think so. Yeah, I think I don't actually have an opinion on it, to be honest with you. It's one of those where
why would he be wearing the ring? He must have been married to someone, right? Surely.
Well, Potentially, yeah.
Maybe he was just so sexy he wanted to scare off the ladies.
I've heard the opposite. I've heard that some men wear wedding rings
to attract,
because it's kind of to attract, because it shows that, hey, this person values commitment, and then suddenly you get all these women swarming around you. I don't know if it's true.
I can't see more to be that. You'd be probably more.
No, I can't see that.
More that he was married.
Or I suppose the other theory is he was on an assignment undercover or something, and I suppose maybe there's a way to rationalise it that way. But I think the most likely is that he was married, and the most likely person he was married to was Deana Fowler. I just don't know why it was so short term, but yeah. Crazy weekend in Las Vegas, maybe, something like that.
Maybe. Clearly he couldn't trust her. Trust issues.
All right, let's move on. That's my opinion anyway. We'll see. We get some. That's one of the things about the episode is we get the elements from the end and from Fight the Future trying to coexist in the same episode. One of which is Gibson Praise, of course, who the cigarette smoking man talks with. I'm not sure I ever warmed to Gibson Praise as a character. Too often I just find him a little bit annoying. And I know a lot of kids are annoying, but even so.
That annoying kid.
What do you guys reckon? Sarah, what do you reckon?
As a character, I find him really interesting because the way and I assume this is direction, but the way he plays the character is that he's like this all-knowing, all-wise kid because he's telepathic and he can read people's thoughts. But I do appreciate the little moments where he does act like a kid and he kind of has that sarcasm, Yeah. But it never really said, like, how old is he supposed to be?
12,
I was never clear. 12, yeah.
I think.
And also, I always wonder, like, where is this kid's parents if he's only 12? I know they said his mom was in the Philippines or something, but what is he doing on a chess tournament with no guardian or no parent? Like, he's just, like, out there in the world, this little kid. I mean, 12 is kind of, getting close to being okay, but he's still a kid. And what is he doing, like, without any kind of, like, even just, like, if he's, like, this chess whiz or whatever, doesn't he have, like, a manager or, like, somebody with him to, like, go to these tournaments and look after him? Like, it just doesn't make any sense to me at all. And then he, like, gets kidnapped and disappears and all this stuff, and there's, like, no mention of parents after that one brief mention of his mom being still in the Philippines. And just, like, where is this child's parents?
Or maybe he had an aunt or somebody in America.
But where are they? He's been kidnapped.
I think he worked slightly better as a character in the end.
Yeah.
I'm not sure he worked as well afterwards. What do you reckon, Kurt?
I think it's problematic because it's starting to get to that kind of Campbellian one, there's this one solution fits all kind of thing, and the whole key to the X-Files cast starts to come in, doesn't it? And I think that you're starting to paint yourself in the corner. I think it does pay off in season 8 when he says it comes into a kid. That kid name is Gibson Praise. It's nice to get him to return at that point. But as a character, I think he's a struggle because he knows too much. He's too superhuman. He's too Superman. It's the fact that he can read people's minds. It's a good one-off trick, as you say, with, like, in the end or whatever. And if something drastic happened to him where he just disappeared because of say like the Eves or whatever in season 1, where you never see him again, and you don't know where he's going, if he's on the run or whatever. That could be quite a nice leave that alone, because he could be back in the Philippines with his mother hiding away somewhere. And obviously they try and do that a bit in season 8, but it's the fact that they keep bringing him back, and I don't like this whole idea. And as much as I like Sunshine Days, of the key to the X-Files is this one thing that can unlock everything. I think they paint themselves into the corner with him.
Another thing that really makes me wonder is, why is this random kid from the Philippines, why does he have his alien DNA activated? And how did it get that way? And how did this one guy who, I assume that because he works for the Roush company or whatever, like, maybe he had an accident in the lab and he got infected somehow, but Mulder just completely glosses over the fact that Sandy got infected. This rando guy in Arizona got infected with this virus. And how did the virus get activated in Gibson Praise. Where did he come from? Like, how did that happen? I'm like, okay, so he's the key to the X-Files. Has he been experimented on? Was he, like, part of some weird, like, experiment, like, you know, with Scully and the ova and, like, all of that stuff? Like, is that tie into it? Like,
was it near a UFO crash site, potentially?
Yes!
Because obviously you can get it that way.
So many questions. And it's like it doesn't even matter. They just gloss right over it. And it's like, well, how they got there doesn't matter. It's not important. Just pretend like they're here and focus on this. It's like, okay,
I don't have an issue with the fact of not knowing where Gibson Praise got his powers from, because I quite like the ambiguity of that, because you can make your own mind upon that. I think you're right with the Rausch thing, though, because the fact that there's a real big element of Rausch, as Carl mentioned, was mentioned in Redux. And that was Skinner, wasn't it, that mentions that? Mm-hmm. He was the one that was investigating that point. And you've got this runaway alien. Now, obviously, the runaway alien is really important because it's absolute proof there's aliens, because it's an alien. But even by the end of it, it's not really followed up on. So there's nothing on, the fact that where's Rausch? Have they even, like the end of the film, are they cleaning up or whatever? It's just the fact of, Rausch employee got infected by an alien.
Did the bees get out? Are they going to infect a bunch of other people? Like,
I mean, in my headcanon, as I say, I think that it's the oil that's being transported because they're aware now of the issue of infection can create aliens. So I think there's a connection there, which is not implicit, which I quite like, but there's no real element to it.
So I've been posting the XCast quarantine posts on Facebook and Twitter over the last few months. As we record, I've just got to the truth. And obviously the big issue there is like the whole courtroom stuff and recapping the plot and everything. And I posted what William B. Davis said from his memoir, which I thought was interesting. And he talks about how the mythology had kind of an improvisatory feel, not, made up as they go along, and different elements come in and come out. And that's part of the reason why it was fun, is because you didn't know where it was going after a certain point. And as Sarah said, a lot of people kind of got tired of that. So it doesn't bother me so much that there are these little loose ends and things and we diverge and we go on different paths. But I think ultimately it gets the series into a problem, doesn't it? Because it gets too much for a lot of people. And then when they sit down and tie it all together, and the way they do it in The Truth is quite inelegant, isn't it? They kind of put you through the slideshow, as Kurt was talking about on Twitter. So I don't know. Let's move it on. So we get a few interesting scenes here, don't we? Mulder and Scully investigating. Even Scully's a bit like, why do I bother? It just doesn't make sense to me why you're hitting those beats straight after the film where they've ended up kind of as a unit again. But hey, there we are. Mulder asks Scully if she needs this thing to bite her on the arse at one point. Mm-hmm. What do you think about the emphasis, though? Because we've come from the end where there's more of an emphasis on the melodrama and the relationship. I think we've had Fight the Future where there's the near kiss in the hallway. I mean, there's a moment here where she grabs Mulder's hand and they talk a bit about, I think there's an allusion at one point to the hallway scene in Fight the Future, but it's not as heavy an emphasis on the relationship as we've had maybe just before it, is there? I don't know. Sarah, as a shipper, is that a bit unfortunate or not?
I don't know. This scene was really tough for me because there's so many feelings to work through, because they're both having so much angst. Like, Mulder just, it's hard for me to juxtapose the Mulder in the hallway and the Mulder who would go to the actual literal ends of the earth for Scully and then say that line where he's like, what, you just wanted to jump up and bite you on the ass? Like, that just seems very out of sorts, out of character after what they've been through together. And
well, for me, can I jump in there? Just for me, the fact that she was encased in a block of ice with an alien virus down her throat, is that not enough? Or do you have to be bitten on the ass on top of that?
But she doesn't, there's so little about that she remembers, Kurt. She was not aware of all of it. But, okay, the thing that really irritates me about this scene, and I know I keep saying that, this bothers me, but anyway, so, okay, this scene, when characters, and it's not just Mulder and Scully, but it's any characters, when they very obviously don't say the things that they need to say, it really, because all Scully needs to say is like she says, I wouldn't be honest. And yeah, okay, I get that. And I know that you want to be like true to yourself. And I appreciate that she wants to be true to herself. But she just needs to say, like, this is how I'm figuring it out. Just let me do it my way, Mulder. Like, the part where she's like, I don't not believe you. It's just like, this is her way of processing it. And Mulder's not he's being man baby Mulder at this point. And I get that. Like, they're both very much being themselves, which I appreciate. But at the same time, the communication. This is when I was like screaming at the television. Just talk to each other.
Well, I suppose what I was wondering, Kurt, was like, because when I say the relationship earlier, obviously these scenes are all relevant to the relationship, but I mean the fact that in the end and in Fight the Future, there's more of an explicit suggestion of romantic intimations or feelings, and there's less of that here, isn't there? So, yeah, I don't know. Do you think it kind of runs on from those earlier things well? Or?
Well, I think you're right. I think there is a certain amount of processing, but I think Chris Carter's. It's interesting how Chris Carter obviously is involved in the film. He's involved in this episode, and he's involved in Triangle, and Triangle has a particular moment at the end. So he's totally understanding where they are and what they're doing. Yeah. I think that he's just trying to hold it off and use that angst a bit much. And I think Sarah's right that you need to have some form of processing. The fact, even if it wasn't between the two of them, even like a solo scene with them or something to intimate it, and that's one thing that the X-Files doesn't do very well. If you talk about Mulder's abduction in 8, for example, there's no PTSD kind of stuff happening there, and I think that this has been a big thing for them. They've literally got to the point of touching lips almost, and then that then takes a step back. And yeah, by all means do that. And if you're going to involve Foley in that, then fair enough. But Foley's not even, because even that's not quite right. Because as much as I do not like Scully in the end, I think I just don't like the way I don't like the way that she's portrayed. I don't like from minute one that Daniela Foley appears, she is instantly on tenterhooks, and I just don't buy it. I don't buy it at that point because it's like this is purely to elicit a fan reaction, and I don't like that. I think it could have been woven in because I think Scully's reactions in this episode work a lot better because it's non-committal. There's no real. She's just kind of there, and even when they're walking back to the car, she's kind of like, "Come on, Mo, let's go. Come on, you don't need this kind of thing." I'd have preferred it like that, but there's no even intimation of Foley getting involved to like make them go through that motion. So Foley's not used to effect. Scully's not used to effect because she's going back to the whole science, and I didn't see it, and touch hands, and that's about it. And I can see there could be an awkwardness about it, but. You're right. There's a disconnect between all three elements, and there's no cohesion in there, and I think it suffers for that.
That's a good point, I think, Kurt, because it's like you've got 2 steps forward and 10 steps back, and the most fun about watching good characters and meaty characters like this is like getting to see them change and grow, and they just went through like this huge thing. And you don't get to see any growth or change, and their characters are like, no, I'm going to like stick hard on this point. And I think that's very frustrating.
That's the frustrating thing about this episode for me, I think. Yeah, I think so. Okay, so we get some stuff in the nuclear power plant. I've got to mention the fact that the guy is called Homer. I mean, I've never understood if that's meant to be his nickname or whether he's actually called Homer. It's a bit obvious as a joke. Anyway, from Chris Carter, isn't it? I don't know. It's always annoyed me a bit.
Well, I'm glad you said nickname because I have always taken it as a nickname. Even if it isn't, I've taken it as a nickname because I think it's horrendous that they've actually called him Homer. But I can get on board with it if it's just a nickname because he works in a power plant and he's lazy.
We need someone to freeze frame. He's got an ID badge on, hasn't he? We should be able to see that, but I couldn't see it on the screen earlier.
Yeah. I think it's particularly bad if they have done that. I don't like it.
Decent creepy stuff, I suppose, as he investigates the reactor. I thought that location was all pretty evocative and effective, actually, that they've used for the nuclear power plant.
Creepy stuff. I mean, it's like, get back to the real X-Files people. We finally get some dark creepiness going on after all this, you know.
So what happened? Mulder and Scully talk with Spender and Foley. They find Gibson in the car. I suppose all this stuff with Gibson, it ultimately leads to Mulder and Scully splitting up, doesn't it? And Scully seems to think that Gibson is the thing they need to be really investigating. Obviously, Mulder's off with Foley, tracking down the alien, and then it all comes together. I suppose there's some elements, Kurt, isn't there? What we were talking about how upfront the stuff was in the end about between the Mulder, Scully, Foley triangle. I suppose it's a bit more subdued here, isn't it? Like Foley says at one point, you don't think this makes sense in any conventional way. So it's like the implication is there, but she's not quite as upfront about it as maybe she was in that previous episode, maybe. Yeah,
and I think by her saying that phrase, I actually said that to Sarah last night, actually, that very thing. That, to me, almost like, for me personally, it almost felt like you can imagine them having that conversation in the when X-Files was first discovered. I can imagine that conversation happening. And I think that was a nice scene, actually, with him and Foley, because they are talking about how things work, and the fact that Mulder's not even thinking about it might not be in any conventional way works for me. I think it's like, well, that's quite interesting that Foley's got another way of looking at things that Mulder's not particularly seeing. And as much as we say, like, got the believer and skeptic aspect to it, I think that it's really interesting how they actually use that in this particular scene. That they do have this camaraderie and this kind of togetherness. That there's something that's happened in the past, and they do work well together. And I think the thing's a bit where, she's saying, I think that was legitimate. I think that happened. I think that happened. That feels honest to me. That whole scene does feel really, really honest. And I think it would have been nice to play that, as I say, I'm going back to it again, the balance of do you trust or do you not? Because even in the earlier scene where Mulder says about stabbing him in the back, they are playing with this idea. It's just that they don't follow it through. But I do like it.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think there is some potential there, and because of the way the series, we see a bit more of Spender, don't we? After this,
yeah.
And Foley's much more sporadic, and I'm wondering if she was just not available, or if she was too expensive, and they could only get her at certain times or something. But it's a good point, and yeah, that is tantalising. I do think you're right. So, yeah, Mulder and Foley at the nuclear plant. I suppose Scully calls at one point, we're onto something huge. Gibson's got the virus in his system. I'm just not sure if it feels huge. Do you know what I mean? After we've come from the big blockbuster film with the big, massive ship and all that, maybe it's huge in a certain sense, but it doesn't feel it.
Well, I think it kind of ties back into that scene where Gibson is reading her mind, and he's like, it's true, you just don't want to believe it. And that's big stuff. That's huge, because, we finally get that out there. And I mean, friggin' telepathic Gibson Praise has to say it, to be the one out loud to say it. But I mean, it is big, because now Scully has her proof, and that's big to her.
Yeah. So,
whether or not in the whole scheme of things it's very big, I think it's big to Scully, because now she can go to Mulder, and now she can be like, all right, now I've got it, and now I can make sense of it, because that's how she processes the world, is through science. And there's no secret about that. Like, that's who she is. That's why Mulder loves her, which really irritates me, because okay, I've got to stop saying that. But that's why Mulder loves her, and that's why he appreciates her, and that's why he needs her. And that's why they had the whole scene in the hallway, because telling her all that stuff, it's like, then he makes this 180 or whatever, and he's telling her, like, you're making me so frustrated by your strict rationalism, when he was saying, like, that's why I love you and appreciate you. It's just, it doesn't jive.
No, I can see a lot of what you're saying in terms of the way the scene must, this from Scully must be intended. For just whatever reason, Kurt, it just doesn't register with me. And it's not just this moment, but it's like the final scene in the episode and stuff as well. It just doesn't register with me as much as it probably should. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, just touching on what Sarah says, and I'll touch upon that as well, it's that it's interesting you should say about the Gibson Praise thing, because that's the perfect person to deal with the whole aspect of, the awkwardness between the two of them, that he actually says that you already know it, you just don't want to believe it. It's like, I want more of that. That's what I want to see, because Gillian Anderson would play that perfectly. And I think that we don't get that, and that's a real struggle for me, and that's a perfect point. Going to the whole thing of, this is big, this is huge. You're right, it doesn't feel that way. It doesn't feel like the phone call when Mulder's in the boxcar in Anasazi. That to me was huge, because at the time, that's a massive revelation. And there just doesn't seem, it's that superhuman thing of like, it's no surprise, because he's kind of like someone that can read minds, and he's got this superpower, so why is it huge? He's already a superhuman. So, and I think that there's no real tension there. The music doesn't really work on that either. There's no there's no propulsiveness about it. There's no right, okay, brilliant. Yeah, well, I'm stuck in a nuclear power plant hunting an alien, and you're in a hospital with a kid who's got a virus who's extraterrestrial. It's like, where's that going? Yeah, there's no end game to it at that point.
Some of this stuff in the power plant, it reminded me a little of Herrenvolk, when they're running around in the warehouse or whatever it is.
I think individually they work. I think individually they do work, but I just don't think there's that end point of where, right, okay, so you've got these revelations, you're chasing an alien, and you have proof. Where's it going? Where's the end game? What's the actual end result?
But also, I mean, Scully's like telling him, she's like, "Oh, hey, I found some DNA in this kid," and he's like holding an actual alien skin in his hand. And he's like, "Yeah, I found something too, Scully."
Well, poor Gibson ends up locked in, doesn't he? He's been taken with the Syndicate guys with him. The Syndicate guy gets dispatched, and Gibson's locked in.
In Mulder's face when he's like, "Oh, it's bad." Mulder's face.
And Foley, crafty old Foley, pointing a gun at Mulder as the other people arrive. Obviously, she's trying to protect his work on the X-Files. Would be what she said. And it leads to the hearing, of course. And this is where we get a new character, and this is kind of interesting. So, not only are Spender and Foley on the X-Files, Mulder and Scully must cease all activity related to the X-Files, so they shouldn't be off doing these cases. They're on probation, so there's that hanging over them, and they're now reporting to Deputy Director Kirsch, James Pickens Jr. Good to see him, and as I remember, it's going to be interesting to talk about Kirsch in Season 6, because I think in this first part of the season, they actually play him up quite a bit. He's in quite a few of the episodes. Happy to see him on your rewatch, Sarah?
Yeah, I mean, sure. It's as much as I don't like his character, I guess. I do like him as an actor. I appreciate his actor capabilities, but
he's no Skinner.
Yeah,
no Skinner.
No. But I do appreciate at the end of this scene, you get the match cut with Mulder and Spender, and it's like the most foreshadowiest foreshadow that happens. It's like, wow. Hindsight.
I like, just on Kirsch though, I like this because this is the promise of something that's a bit of a different dynamic, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because obviously Skinner, we know all about Skinner, he's trying to help them where he can. Kirsch, and he's introduced, the first shot of him is good, and we think he's going to be this hard-nosed guy, and we've got the potential to see that play out. So yeah, Kirsch, I liked seeing him.
I do. I think he works a lot better with Doggett than he does with Mulder and Scully, to be honest. But
that's a good point.
But I'm similar to Sarah. The character's very one-dimensional, and even up into the truth. I know you mentioned the truth before with where rewatch is. That his turnabout in there. Well, I'd like to have seen that foreshadowed a bit more for talking about foreshadowing. But he's a good one to pull out at the beginning, and as a hardened character. And I know that obviously they played around with it in season 1 with different bosses and whatever. So as a hardened character, he's really good. And as we see him playing throughout season 6, whether or not he works in triangles is another question in mind. But he's a character that I'm not particularly fond of him as a character, but he's a great actor.
Well, that shot though, when they're like, "And you'll be directed by Assistant Director Kirsch," and it's like, dun dun dun.
Yeah,
it's like, oh my god, who's this dude?
Yeah. And it's like, I'm surprised they didn't do like the zoom in, zoom out, zoom in, zoom out, It's like very dramatic.
I think what we'll see in the rewatch is they are trying to really integrate Kirsch in the first few episodes. And then I think when we get to Two Fathers, One Son, obviously he gets shuffled away after that, and I think it doesn't really come off like they must have intended. And I think Kurt's right. Maybe he does work better in season 8 overall. I think that's a good point. So Spender, as Sarah's mentioned, and the Smoking Man. I always like seeing them two together. I always think those scenes are well played. And I think the Smoking Man's interesting here. This thing about you can kill a man, but you can't kill what he stands for. Not unless you first break his spirit. That's a beautiful thing to see. So obviously it's the old question, like, why don't they just kill Mulder? But it's always fun to hear him kind of
so evil
justify it, and it's quite nice and sinister here, isn't it? Yeah.
All he needed was a twirly mustache. That's the one thing missing.
I mean, surely to break his spirit, all he needs to do is split Mulder and Scully up, and then they'll be fine, because that's what happened in the film. So that didn't work. So they went to the ends of the earth, as Sarah said. So that didn't work. So how are they going to break his spirit now? Oh, take the X-Files away from him. They said that's his other love. So we'll see.
Yeah. Of course, Mulder immediately is working on those files. I'm totally disregarding everything I was told.
I know I'm the only one who thinks this, but they're like so totally banging already. I know it. In my depths of my headcanon soul. They're like, they've so totally done it at least once or twice already.
I don't think they have.
It's fine.
No,
like everybody can disagree. Like I totally know I'm alone. Like this is just me. I'm on this hill with this flag standing here all by myself, but it's okay.
I saw an interesting Twitter thread about this recently where somebody was saying that, kind of like we shouldn't downplay the strength of their platonic relationship as well. It's like that friendship is completely meaningful even before you add in the sexual element. So
correct.
Yeah, that's fair, and I agree with that too. But I can't.
You still think they were just
absolutely in denial? They haven't banged full stop.
I know. It's fine.
Ever. No, I am softer. As I say, season 6. I don't mind the season 6 arc actually. I just don't want to see it. I just don't particularly want to see it on screen within the story. But that's just my own personal opinion. But I am quite happy.
Debate.
Yes, I am quite happy with the way it is right at this moment from the beginning. Given aside the conversation we've had about what's happened in the end and Fight the Future, that overall around season 6, I'm still happy with where they are right now, up until and including the ranking.
Yeah,
I'm not happy with this scene because Scully at one point asks Mulder for his trust, and I'm just thinking, like, we should be well past this point by now.
Yes.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Yeah.
I think this is why people dislike the Foley stuff, is because it makes them have to write these characters this, or these characters end up written in a slightly different way. But I don't know.
Well, she says, Mulder, I need you to trust me, and he literally just says, no, I'm not going to. He's like, I can't accept. When he says I can't accept that, unless it's like, if it refutes everything I believe in, he's literally saying, I can't accept you. And that just,
yeah.
Like, why doesn't she just smack him over the face with that folder? That's what I want to do. Because it's just, I'm just like, oh, Mulder. Like, if they could have just cut that one line, it would have been fine.
Yeah.
They did not need that one line. Just cut it. Just, no.
Yeah, you don't, because it's bashing you over the head with something you don't need. And that's the one thing. You're right, Carl. I think the Foley stuff, there's a lot of mistakes that they make. That's one of them, even though she's not even involved in that, because they're bringing up this idea of trusting each other. And it's like, as you say, they're well beyond the point of that. Yes, have this outside influence affect the relationship, but you don't need to go through the whole trust issue. You can go through a trust issue of Scully not trusting her. I completely get that. I think they went too hard, as again, going back to the end again. Sorry, I'm going to like a broken record. But of not having that trust disparity between Diana Foley and Scully, but the dynamic of those two together, and Scully can have issues with the way that he is around her. But the fact that they're talking about the trust between themselves, I think you've trodden that path. You don't need to go down that route.
Yeah. So this scene contains the important information that Gibson's inactive DNA is turned on. He and therefore all of us are in some way extraterrestrial. And I think, like you said earlier, it's just, it's a while then before this is even referred to again, isn't it? From what I remember.
Yeah, it's basically biogenesis, really, isn't it? I think.
Yeah.
So.
I don't know if you guys had over there. We have these ads, or used to. I don't see them much anymore, but for the shingles virus. And the ad goes,
No.
the ad goes, if you've had the chicken pox, the virus is already in you. It's like, because, you know, when you have shingles, it's like the same virus as the chicken pox, but it was so it was such an ominous ad, because they came out with this shingles vaccine or whatever, and they're like, if you've had the chicken pox, the shingles virus is already in you. And it makes me think about this every single time I watch
Did you ever read that story about Beyonce and a group of friends meeting up after they all got chicken pox?
No.
Did you hear that? Yeah, it was all the shingles ladies.
Oh my God, I fell for that as well. Oh my God.
Oh, Kurt, what are we going to do with them?
I don't know.
Anyway, I've heard the word virus so many times this year, I'm completely fed up of it. Anyway.
Well, luckily, whatever your next episode was, hopefully isn't about a virus, so we should be all right.
Anyway, moving swiftly on. I suppose it's quite significant for mythology buffs that we see the alien, the Fight the Future alien, transforming into the standard grey. That's the final scene, isn't it?
Yeah.
Kurt, did that strike you as significant as a mythology buff?
It's interesting. I remember being not particularly nonplussed about it when I first saw it. I was like, "Oh, that's interesting." That's and saying that, I think the Diana Foley mention of a conventional way is like a way of saying, this is where you're going to go to. I think it's a bit of a cop out for later seasons, because it would have been nice to see this kind of thing develop more, or as I say, going into this over the seasons, of actually having, you mentioned Monster of the Week, we mentioned that in the film as well, that the alien itself is a Monster of the Week. You could have quite a lot of stories around this, and they've used it as a plot device to say, we've had the big feature film, we've had the big alien, let's go back to the small greys, and yes, okay, it links in the oil, it links in the aliens as they burst out, and it links in the greys. Is it strong enough? I'm not entirely sure that its gestation is 12 hours, and then within 24 it's a grey intelligent alien. It's maybe a bit of a push, but it's a sci-fi thing at the end of the day, so I'll run with it. I just think that if you're going down like the truth way of like spelling it out, this effectively tells you what the whole story is, and I can see why they were trying to tie up some of the loose ends to get to 2001 Sun, because effectively that's what it's doing, and then it's only like closure and the like in season 7 where you can build upon that. And he's in the beginning, Chris Carter's obviously kind of getting to the point of wanting to do something like Biogenesis and that kind of trilogy. So so you can see where his mind was at with trying to close it up.
I want to see the buddy comedy Gibson and the Grey. I want to see that spinoff. Because they just I imagine them just walking into the sunset together, because, Gibson doesn't have any parents. So now the gray alien is his mom, and they're just going to go off and have good times together and speak telepathically to one another. And
I know that we've talked off air, etc. before, but and we nicknamed the film one She Alien, didn't we? So that was the alien in the X-Files movie. We nicknamed She Alien. So what we're going to call this one, Sheila, wasn't it? That's what we were calling her.
Sheila.
So what we calling this mother?
I don't know. I got nothing. I'm tired.
You got nothing.
My brain's dead.
Fairly.
Well, while Sarah thinks about that, I think we'll take a look at what's in our Xcast mailbag this week. All right, so starting off with Tony Black, still around, and looking forward to, I think Arcadia, me and Sarah and Tony are going to do soon, which will be a fun one. But Tony says, I like the beginning. It does a good job, I think, of blending story strands from the end and Fight the Future together, even if it has to undo a little of Fight the Future's powerful affirmation of proof to do it. It's very much mythology on autopilot in many respects, but it visually strikes a different tone immediately, and sets off season 6 in a somewhat unexpected new direction. Not the most vibrant season opener, but solid The X-Files mythology. I mean, I can see a lot of that, but for whatever reason, I just don't like it as much as Tony does, but hey. Chandru Ravindran says, I think this is the worst mythology episode from the first 6 seasons, other than Emily. While it's as slick and well-produced as ever, disconnect from having filmed Fight the Future between seasons 4 and 5 shows up big time here. Gibson Praise magically reappears, Diana, Foley and Jeffrey Spender sit out Fight the Future to recuperate and are suddenly here. The alien from Fight the Future worked in the movie, but I feel like it is far less effective in this episode. Worst of all, though, is the handling of Scully and how she backtracks so much on what happened in Fight the Future. When she says it just wouldn't be honest, that is how I feel about the writing staff's handling of her character at this point. Mulder has every reason to be pissed off that she sandbags him at the hearing and doesn't corroborate anything he says. This episode is super frustrating. I'm kind of in the middle of those two comments between Tony and Chandru. What do you guys think?
Yeah, he's got a lot of points. I think we've already alluded to the hearing that they should have gone in a bit more cohesively. The writing of it, yes, tracking back. I agree with that. They've done that. So yeah, I think there's a bit of that on Tony's. By the way, I do like some of the darkness. It's kind of like the director of photography, the reds and the dark and the kind of different aspects. You know, we've got the sunshiny Arizona stuff, but we've also got the black and the reds, and I thought that was quite nice thematically as well.
Well, it's interesting because in season 8 they try and get back to that old school creepiness, don't they? Obviously still in LA, but it's trying to conjure up much more of the Vancouver style atmosphere. And it's interesting that for the first episode of season 6, they don't try to pretend that then, you know, they don't try and obscure that, and they actually lean into it. And I like the way they do that in some episodes like Drive particularly. And I like some of that here as well with the sun at the beginning and the suburbs and stuff. But all right, let's race through these last ones then. Chris Knowles says, I didn't used to like it, but Tony changed my mind on it. I still hate some of the acting, like the guy in the teaser, Homer, and the FBI panel people who aren't the guy who made the Men in Black joke. You really knew you weren't in Vancouver and were dealing with LA trash.
Wow.
Harsh word. He's not a man to mince his words, is Chris. So
I would not go so far as to say trash. But going back to the Men in Black comment, I think it's more the tone in which he delivers the line that I like the best, because it seems almost like it's just an offhand improv that they kind of kept in, which I think is what I find the funniest part about it. I agree that it's heavy-handed, but yeah.
It sounds like Chris liked that guy, but none of the other people on that panel. Yeah. Jeremy Daniel says, I like the simplicity of this one a good deal, considering all the complications surrounding its place in the show's run. It's basically a monster on a loose story, and as much as I think the Vancouver days are superior, there's a freshness to the look of the season compared to the rest of the show. It becomes boring in season 7. We'll see. I mean, there's a lot of good stuff in 6 and 7, to be fair. I'm looking forward to talking about a lot of it on the show. And just a couple more. Chiara Degli Esposti, I've probably mispronounced every single one of those names, said, good episode. I always loved Scully's relationship with Gibson, and the fact he reveals her interest in studying him as much as healing him makes him more contradictory and human. I always like a flawed and human Scully more than the saint some moments of the show try to convey.
Yeah, and the Frankenstein moment as well, the fact that she's at home, Scully almost feels at home talking to him. And says, Frankenstein, really? And she's like, no, they've done some good work. I actually quite like that. I think that as much as I'm not that fond of Gibson Praise as a character overall, I think that the interplay between her and him and Scully actually works quite well, and I like that particular moment.
Well, it shows the difference between Scully and Foley, because, you know, Foley is just looking at him as something to study, and Scully treats him as a human, which, you know, I appreciate.
Which is not the difference from what Mulder does either, because Mulder does think of him as someone to study. So
yeah. Okay, and finally for today, Andrew Levitt said, the beginning of the end. I appreciate that the episode ties together the disparate elements of the end and Fight the Future, and there are some classic mythology moments in the episode, such as Mulder breaking into the power plant, the Grey Alien's transformation, and Mulder refusing to let go of the burnt X-Files by trying to recover the files. Had the first half of the season followed through with the material established here, such as more Spender and Foley interference, I would rank this higher. As it is, it's merely a distinguished episode, and he gives it a 7 out of 10. All right, guys, I think we've chewed this one over pretty well. Any final thoughts or not?
Just something that's come to mind speaking about Mulder, the fact that he's wanting to find this thing. He says he wants to find this thing, but also the fact that, you know, the whole thing of Scully caring for Gibson and Mulder wanting to use him and saying, "Oh, we could use him." I think that's true to the characters, which is something that I haven't really thought about before. But it just popped into head when you said about Foley. It's the same kind of mindset of we've got to get the proof of who they are and what they are, rather than the actual empathy. Which, you know, Mulder's showcased so many times with various different characters, but in Gibson's thing, it's like it's the key to the X-Files. So there's a slight different take on it.
Okay, good stuff. Okay, just before we go then, Sarah, where can people find you online?
Oh, I am on Twitter all the time at Sarah L. Blair, SarahLBlair. And I'm on Instagram at author.sarah.blair. And by the time this airs, I think I'm going to have a book out.
Exciting.
I know.
Yes.
Good times. So, yeah, it's called Darkness Loves Company, and it's the prequel to my first novel, Darkness Shifting. And I think if you like the X-Files, you'll probably like that book.
Very exciting times, Sarah. Looking forward to seeing the second book. Kurt, how about you? Where are you online?
You can find me on Twitter at rmuldrake. It's RMULDRAKE. Running alongside this, actually, we're not that far away from the kind of air date as well as the Millennium episode TV show. Oh, yeah. The time is now. So we're currently going through season 3. So we're slightly ahead of this recording. But from air dates, I think we're only going to be about 5 or 6 weeks apart from when each episode aired. So that's quite interesting in itself. And you can find that at the Time Is Now pod. And you can also find me on the Red Dwarf podcast, Shipwrecked and Comatose, and that's at Red Dwarf pod.
Great stuff. And if you would like to find me on Twitter, I'm at CKJ Sweeney. I'm also fairly active in the X-Files Basement Facebook group that we have. So guys, yeah, it's been fun to do this one to kick off season 6. And I know we'll all be back soon at various points. I think you'll be back on the episode about Triangle, won't you?
I will.
Paige.
With Paige, yeah.
And then Sarah, you're doing a Dreamland 2-parter, aren't you, with Andy Blaker?
That's right. Looking forward to it. It's going to be fun.
It is. And then I think after that, the 3 of us are reuniting. We'll all be on Terms of Endearment together, aren't we? Is the plan. So that's one to look forward to.
Yeah.
All right. So that's all for today, listeners. You can find the X-Cast in all the usual places. On Twitter at the X_cast. The X-Files Basement on Facebook. We're also on Instagram. But until next time, listeners, always remember, trust no one.
Elsewhere on We Made This. We are Starfleet.
Honestly, it felt so great to see the Starship Discovery again.
Yeah, out of the frying pan and into the fire.
Right into the fire. So in our previous episode, I had commented on how I felt like all the dramatic tension that the writers built up with Burnham falling kind of felt like, all right. But here, I felt the exact opposite. It just seemed like the right blend of tension and risk and what's at stake.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head, and I think there's a couple of reasons for this. One, I think
The giddy carousel of pop.
So there's one particular thing where I think Sylvia just nails the Mannix, absolutely nails them, and nails them to this day. And she says, the Mannix mission is a simple one. They want to make music exciting, glamorous and interesting again. Make people wake up out of the boredom and meaninglessness of 20th century life and jump up and down to some good old rock and roll music and think about things and have a laugh, because at the end of the day, none of us will ever be happy. And I had to have everything about them immediately.
The Movie Palace.
Before we even think about the book, I suppose, were you coming to this as a Marilyn Monroe fan, particularly?
No, not at all. In fact, I'll admit, it's very awful, but I knew almost nothing about Marilyn Monroe. I mean, I knew of her. She's a cultural icon.
Yeah.
I would say she's even gone beyond that now, and she's almost a symbol. So I knew of her. I had seen a few movies that she'd been in, although, to be honest, whenever I watched those movies, I wasn't really focusing on her because she was sort of in the background.
Check out all of these shows and more on the We Made This podcast network. The X-Cast and X-Files podcast was created by Tony Black and is produced and hosted by Carl Sweeney, Sarah Blair and Kurt North.
You can find the podcast on Twitter at the X_cast, on Facebook by typing in the X-Cast, and in our group, X-Files Basement, the X-Cast podcast fan group, and on Instagram at the X-Cast pod.
Don't forget, you can support the show by becoming a member on Patreon. Our patrons get early access to episodes, behind-the-scenes chats with our hosts and a thriving community of X-Files, and other premium interviews and specials. To find out more and subscribe, you can go to patreon.com/thexcast. That's patreon.com/thexcast.
We are also part of the We Made This podcast network, full of popular culture shows, including our Millennium series, The Time Is Now. You can find all of our shows at our website, wemadethispod.com, or via Twitter at wemadethispod.
Thanks for listening, and keep watching the skies.